Hello, and welcome to This Conversation Matters, a weekly show about the social issues shaping our communities, from race and inequality to justice, economic opportunity, and overall well-being. I'm Sheree R. Each week, I speak with experts and people with lived experience to help you better understand why these issues matter in our lives. Okay, let's start a little bit with what I know about you. Barbara Brandon-Croft, and you have had a very long, successful career in journalism in the magazine publishing industry, but also this passion for creating comic strips that, you grew up in a household with your father who was the premier,
He's
um
a pioneer. Yeah.
pioneer
Yeah.
in this field. So tell us a little bit about who you are in terms of first through your father's lens of how you saw him as a child in terms of the comic strips that he created and how that inspired you. And then we'll get a little bit more into your career journey.
Okay. So I am Barbara Brandon-Croft, and my dad was Brumsic Brandon Jr., and he was a cartoonist. He was an editorial cartoonist for Freedom Ways. He was a comic strip cartoonist. He had a comic strip called Luther for 18 years. My dad was there was a trio of Black cartoonists. My dad, Brumsic Brandon Jr., who did Luther, and then there was Maury Turner, who did We Pals, and then there was Ted Shearer, who did Quincy. So in the late 60s, they were like one after another, right in between 1968 and 1970 that they all became.
Syndicated in
Yes,
newspapers across the nation.
that's right, that's right. And I say mainstream, and when I say mainstream, back then, and even when I started, mainstream is really a euphemism for the white press, you know, and the point being that there was, as where everywhere else in the country, segregation, and there were segregated newspapers, and so there had never been Black cartoonists drawing Black characters in white newspapers when they started, and so that's what makes the three of them pioneers. And so I grew up. So let's see, 1970s, 1968, all of that. I was fairly young. So I had a dad who was a cartoonist, and he worked at home, and I saw his work ethic. So Luther was uh, a daily, so it was, constant. You have to put out this comic strip. Um, and he also did, the political cartoons, and he also was Mr. BB on a TV show, in a local New York TV show, and he was also, he illustrated a book, a Sesame Street book, so that he was busy, and so I saw him, as working all the time. I mean, I really got the idea of what it takes to be a cartoonist, a syndicated cartoonist, and, at some point, he needed help doing his work, and he gave my brother and I a test to see who had the steadier hand. Hilarious,
Okay.
because I won that competition. My brother's was a real joke. It was hilarious. Um, we kept the picture up for a long time. It was very shaky. He had us trace one of his characters. So I got the job of putting, back then it was called Zipatone, and it's a film that you put on the actual art and you cut it out. Now people hit a button on a computer, but it was a real physical thing that I actually got paid for doing that, which was cool. But I had no idea I was going to be a cartoonist. I was just doing that because I could do it. I had the skill to do it, and I was getting paid.
And you're in training without really
But
knowing it because you're
yes,
tracing cartoons and
yes,
it launched
I was in
something.
training without even understanding that, and Um, honestly, I had no plan to be a cartoonist. So let's see. So and I got paid. So that's the other thing. When you're in junior high school and you get a little $5 a week or $5 every other week, that was,
Mhm.
that. Um, but, of course, it was the early '70s. And then I ended up going to college. When it was time to go to college, I applied to since I'd always been in the art talent classes, that my public schools had, and I thought maybe I would do something in the arts. No idea what. And I applied, I sent in a portfolio. I got accepted to Syracuse. They have a school of visual and performing arts. And I was accepted. And there I was for 4 years. I did the whole 4 years and still didn't get a degree. Shameful.
Okay.
Shameful. I mean, I had like so many credits, I was like, but I
Mhm.
was taking classes. Anything that,
Whatever interested you, probably.
whatever interests me, yes, I would just take the I needed, a guidance counselor like I had in high school, I was in college, I was like I was socially, I was blooming, I was like, "Oh,
Mm.
these are people, you have your own life and you can do whatever you want and, you can stay out," I was just living life and loving it, and so when it came time to say, "Alright, it's time to graduate," I was like, "Oh, I'm 6 credits short?" I probably had enough credits, they just needed to be, focused on something.
Mhm.
My focus I thought I was getting a degree in illustration, but I changed my degree a few times. So anyway, that story, haunted my parents forever. They're like it was like, total embarrassment. Still had no idea I was gonna be a cartoonist.
And I wanna think too, going back with your dad starting that well, he was, I'm sure, obviously doing this before he got syndicated because you're that good. But 1968, you mentioned that, and
Yeah.
I believe that was the year the Kerner Commission report
Yep.
came out, where we have the federal government kinda saying, "We need more journalists of color, more people of color, primarily Black people,
Yes. Yeah,
at mainstream newspapers."
that's right.
And I don't know if that was an impetus that
I
helped them
believe it
get in.
was. I
Okay.
believe it was. I believe that, knowing, the Kerner report, yes, but also just what was going on in the world, there were riots. There were riots in my neighborhood in Long Island. I was born in Brooklyn, but I grew up on Long Island, Newcastle, Black community, riots there. There were riots everywhere, and my dad and my mom are both from DC. There were riots there, Newark, LA, everywhere, um, and that is exactly what happened. These white newspapers were looking for an opportunity to show that they're trying to do the right thing. They're looking for a way to appease their readership.
Mhm,
And there was my dad and Maury Turner and Quincy, Ted Shearer prepared to do it. Because
mhm.
they had all been cartoonists. It's just that you couldn't get published in the mainstream press. And then of course what happens is a newspaper will get one and say, we don't need the other one because we already have, we don't need Luther because we already have Quincy.
The tokenism, we got one. Yeah.
Exactly. As if, that one of them can represent all
Yeah.
folks. So, so yeah, they would even say we have Friday Foster. We don't need Luther. I mean, like, so, but he had a 18-year-long career.
For
Yeah.
those who don't know, tell us a little bit more about Luther and what it was about.
Yeah. So Luther was, what happened was a newspaper on Long Island, Newsday, reached out to him and said, we want you to do a comic strip. He deliberately asked him if he would be able to do a comic strip. They had seen his work in Freedom Ways, and they asked him if he would create a comic strip for Newsday. And he was like, "Sure." That was what he always dreamed of doing, being a syndicated cartoonist, and it was a small syndicate called, Newsday Specials or something like that, and he came up with this idea of having this cast of kids. That's another point to consider, that at that time, what the newspaper said they wanted Black characters, but what was most, least offensive to bringing these Black characters into these white homes were children. So, we pals as kids, Quincy was a kid, Luther was a kid. Luther was in the what we used to call the inner city back then, the ghetto, and my dad grew up in DC in the ghetto. It's like that was he was accustomed to the inner city, and that's what he created these characters. Um, the main character was Luther, and he was named after Martin Luther King. That's how he got his name. And he had there was a cast of young ones, about 3rd grade, maybe a little younger, and, they had a teacher, Miss Backlash. Dad was clever because the thing is they Newsday was like, "We want you to do this comic strip, but, we don't want them to talk about race." And he's like, "What?" So he worked his way around that. Of course, he would bring up issues, but make whoever was reading it think, "Oh, he's talking about race," and then he wouldn't be. He would be talking about something human, like, "Oh, he's
Oh,
too young," or that kinda he would do those kind of switches. So, yeah, Luther was, pretty powerful. It holds a great place in history, and, he was
gosh.
very proud to have done it.
Yeah, yeah, and I can tell how proud you are
Yes,
of
I
him
know.
as well.
Yes, yes.
And so from there with okay, you have your I'm gonna still call it you got a degree in this
I
illustration
got my
work.
4
You call
years.
it yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
you went 4 years, you took all
yeah.
these courses. And from there, you still weren't necessarily thinking you were gonna do comic strips.
No,
What
no.
so what did you go do?
So, when the graduation was over, I, still wanted to stay in Syracuse, having a good time. I got a job at J.C. Penney's working in the art department. I was very proud of that. And
Mhm.
my dad's like, "You go to school for 4 years to work in a store?" I was like, I was doing displays. I was loving it. After a while, they weren't gonna help me, financially, and I couldn't sustain myself, so I came home. And
Mhm.
I looked in the paper, I was like I saw an ad for, they needed a fashion reporter, and they would consider a trainee. And I'm like, "Well, there we go, that's my
Mhm.
job." So,
Yeah.
I went there and I took a portfolio, and as it turned out, it was a small still it was national, it was still a small publication called Retail News Bureau, and they needed an illustrator too. And I think there were 4 of us, right? 2 editors and 2 writers, and then the support staff.
And
And
was this basically like 2 different roles, but you were able to fill both of them, or did they need a
yes,
reporter who can also do illustration? Because that would've been hard to find
I
normally.
mean, yeah, and I don't think they expected to find that because when I just bought the portfolio just in case, and they're like, "Oh, this would be very helpful because we also need it." So my beat was young contemporary and junior markets, and I would go to showrooms and fashion shows and all that, and, it didn't pay that much, but it was kinda cool to be a part of that in Manhattan. You're in New York and you're a fashion reporter. What?
And I also say journalism still doesn't pay very much, so
Yeah, right,
I'm not
right,
surprised.
right, right, right.
And how did your parents feel about that job compared to the JCPenney?
They were like, they were kinda like that, especially since I also got to, do illustrations from time to time, and I was living at home, and I was taking the Long Island Railroad into the city, and I was making enough money. I was making I don't know, it wasn't a lot of money, but it was money, and then my parents decided they, were gonna sell the house, and they were gonna move, and they're like, "So we're moving here, I'm gonna get 2 bedrooms. One's gonna be for us, and one's gonna be your dad's studio." I was like, "Oh."
Oh, yeah.
And that's
Yeah,
when I moved to Brooklyn. So I moved back to
okay.
Brooklyn. So that was 82, 83.
Mhm.
I moved back, because I was born in Brooklyn. I was a baby when we left, but, I moved back to Brooklyn.
That's the way to tell your adult child it's time to move out.
Yeah, yeah.
We're moving, and we're not gonna have a bedroom for you anymore.
We're not gonna have a space for you, like, figure it out.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So and that worked out.
And so, okay, so you're doing the journalism in the retail reporting, and from there, you continue in journalism for a while. So,
Well,
what?
yeah. So what happened was I was at Retail News Bureau, and there was a new magazine coming out that was gonna rival Essence. It was called Elan. Marie Brown, who's a literary agent extraordinaire, was the editor in chief, and I think it was my sister who knew her or somebody knew for somehow, some way, I got a meeting with Marie Brown, and we talked, and, I told her what I was doing. I said, "I'll do anything." I'll work in editorial, I'll work in the art department, I'll sweep the floors. You know, I was, we were having a good time yucking it up. And she's like, "You know what? You have a sense of humor and you draw. Do you think you can come up with a comic strip for us?" I just
Mhm.
said yes. I was like, I'd seen it done all my life. I was like, and then it suddenly
And
said, "Oh, you know what? Of course you can do that. You saw that guy do it."
right. And did she know who your father was or anything like
I
that? Or was
still
it just
don't.
a she
I don't know the answer to that.
okay. Just figure
I
you can
would
you can
love to
you can
ask.
do illustrations, so why not, right?
Yeah, he's like, "You're kind of funny. You draw." But maybe she knew. I don't know. That's a good question. Whenever I get to see her again. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so what did you call that one?
I called it "Where I'm Coming From." Um,
Oh, okay,
yes,
so
I
at the
did.
beginning
So
okay,
that was 1982 or 3.
okay.
I'm gonna say 2 because, I put dates on it when I was creating it, and I have 82 on that, so it took me weeks to come up with an idea, but here it was, a Black woman's magazine, and I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna have" I don't know if you're familiar, you probably are. Jules Pfeiffer, who's a cartoonist who just passed away. He was like 100 when he died. But he had a strip called Pfeiffer. And on occasion, he would have the characters speaking right to the audience. And I liked that. I was like, I like this idea of floating heads. So my idea for the magazine was to have a character, a woman, a black woman talking directly to the audience, to other Black girls. These are my friends, and just very familiar conversation about things that I thought would be fun in a comic strip. And Marie Brown liked it. She was like, "Hey, this is good. Let's come up with more, and we'll see how we're going to pace it, throughout the year." And in my mind, I'm like, "That's 12 strips a year. That sounds good. I would do different woman each time." That was my idea.
Okay.
So it was where I'm coming from, would be where that particular woman was coming from, and, I was all excited. She said, "Do more." I called once I had more done, and, they're like, "I guess you didn't hear." I was like, "What?" They're like, "The magazine folded." They only had
Oh,
2. I
wow.
know, only 2 issues, and my stuff never got in, and I was like, "Dang."
But you had 12, completed at that
Yeah,
time?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah?
I did. Yeah, I was ready to go. So that's why I thought maybe Essence would be interested.
Mm.
Yeah, so I sent letters. I'm a cartoonist, blah, 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 you know, and then I sent samples and I got a reaction from some saying, "Oh, it's good. But we don't know if we're going to put a comic strip in Essence." And one of the editors was like, "So you're not making it as a cartoonist? What do you do?" And I was like, "I'm a fashion writer for Retail News Bureau." And they're like, "Our fashion and beauty editor is pregnant, writer is pregnant, and we need somebody to take her place." I was like, "I'll take the test.
Yeah.
I think I can do it." And I took a test, and I got the gig. And I started 89. No, no, 83 still. It's still 83 because I stayed there till 89. I was there for 5.5 years.
Okay.
And so I wrote fashion and beauty for Essence for I was that's a lot of pages, I'm telling you.
It's a lot,
It's
yeah.
a lot of pages, but I was a fashion and beauty writer for, 5.5 years.
Mhm.
Yeah, got to
Well,
travel. It was
mm,
great. Yeah.
let me hear some of your favorite moments. What was maybe one of I mean, I'm sure there's, like, so many because people ask me that question about some of my favorite articles, and it's hard to kinda pin down, which
Yeah,
ones are
yeah.
better, but tell us a couple of anecdotes of some of the stories that you covered at that time or and where you traveled to also.
So we used to travel, at least the fashion group would travel at least once a year, and it was usually to the, Caribbean. And, so, we went to a lot of different islands. We took, Lisa Bonet. It was her 18th
Okay.
birthday.
Okay.
It was her 18th birthday, and we went to Aruba, and so that was an interesting, um, trip. Uh,
So there was a photo shoot and
as a
what
photo
she's
shoot.
being put
Yeah,
in it, and you have to kinda write about
they wanted me to write about the island, really. So
oh,
I did a little research, and, it was like I was just kinda I loved every bit of being a part of that scene. I was like that sometimes they needed you to hold a reflector, when the sun's there, and, to make sure no shadows or whatever the creative folks was needed, I was there, but I was basically there to take it soak it all in, and that particular, article ended up being mostly about Aruba, so I had to do, some research about that and write about Aruba. Interesting history for sure, and I loved that I got to, meet and interview, Tito Jackson and his
Oh,
wife,
yeah.
and Marlon Jackson and Carol. Tito's wife was Dee Dee, and Marlon's was Carol, and, that was interesting, that's when I learned how I guess that's not true exactly. I was gonna say that's when I started realizing how guarded, celebrities can be, I'm
Mhm.
when meet people, I act like I already know them. I feel like I do, and I
Yeah.
just talk very familiar like, and I think that might be off-putting to some people, certainly celebrities, because they probably get that all the time. Tito was warmer than Marlon, I could say, but, and I have a picture from that day.
Okay.
It's a Polaroid that's fading,
Yeah.
but that was fun.
Get it digitized before it completely fades.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. So, yeah, there were there I if I had my Essence girls with me, we'd have more stories than you could even listen to, but Fashion and Beauty was its own. um, I kinda straddled the editorial side and the art department and the fashion and beauty, um, because it was all connected, but, you had to be a part of all of them.
Okay.
That was my experience as the writer there.
Okay. And also, and similar to your experience in college, where you're taking in, absorbing whatever your interests are, right? And they needed you in multiple places, and you could use your talents in multiple places. So that was great.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and you were how long at Essence?
5.5 years.
5.5 years.
Yes.
Okay. And who was the editor? No.
Susan Taylor was the editor. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was there when, that was early on. Audrey Edwards, was the executive editor. Ionia Dunley was the fashion, editor. Mickey Garth Taylor was the beauty editor. So yeah. I
Okay.
yeah.
And
Uh,
and Essence is one of the premier, Black women's magazines. And so from there, where did you go?
so from there, here's what happened. The Detroit Free Press newspaper, Detroit, um felt a need at that point in time. You know how the pendulum swings. It was the '60s when they're like, "Oh, we need to have black people. We need to show black people." Was swinging again. Different people were getting popular and making noise. Think 1989, and Oprah's blowing up and Prince.
Right.
Everybody. It's like
Yeah.
it was that time, and the editor there, Marty Claus, she was the managing editor. She wanted her pages to reflect the readers. Detroit's chocolate, and was actively looking for black cartoonists. And she sent my dad a letter and said, "Do you know of any black cartoonists?" And he showed me the letter. He's like, "Are you gonna talk about this? Or are you gonna do it?" I was like, "Tsk, I'm gonna do it, man," and I sent those very same samples that I had created, in '82, to Detroit, and they liked it, and I signed a contract with them to do a weekly for them, and I quit Essence. I was like, my mother was like, "What?" It's like I was like, "I'm gonna be
Did
a
you do
cartoon."
both?
I was like, and me, I'm like, I'm gonna be a, cartoonist." You can't live off of one newspaper, but I still did. I was like, "That's fine."
And you moved to Detroit, or did you do it from home in
I
Brooklyn?
did it from home. I was living in Brooklyn. I did it from home, and, um I'd send 2 every other week, so they had what they needed, and, so that went well for a year, but I knew I needed a syndicate because I couldn't very well, reach out to all the newspapers in the country. That's when we were flush with the newspapers, and I was
Mm.
like, "There's no way," you know, from my experience and growing up with my dad, I knew that that's what was needed, a syndicate. So, and I also knew that what syndicates do, they put together a press kit on the comics that they're trying to sell. They have these relationships with all these newspapers. They send a press kit to the newspapers and say, "We have this cartoonist. Do you want him?" That kind of thing. I knew that that was the way it was done. So I put a press kit together of my work and me already being shown in Detroit and letters that I'd already begun to receive, I was and then I kinda called them out on it. I was like, "Yo, syndicates, you haven't added a new black cartoonist since the '60s, and here I am. You've never had a woman. You never had a black woman," you know?
Okay.
So I kinda was, like, putting them on blast a little, and,
Mhm.
I got rejected. I
Okay.
got rejected by, um, all of them, except for one, and that was Universal Press Syndicate, and, they gave me a chance, they gave me a development deal whereby, they just wanna see if you can keep it up, and I was already doing it for Detroit.
To do one every week is a lot for.
Yeah, and it wasn't a daily, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. It wasn't as bad as my dad's schedule, but it was a weekly, and so what I would do is I was doing it for Detroit already, so I'd send the pencil that I did for what I was ended inking in and send it to Detroit. I would send the pencil to Universal Press Syndicate, and, so they had a year of considering me, and they said, "Let's do it." And by then, are you ready? By then, I was doing other little things in fashion, sample sales, backstage at shows and stuff like that. I'm very grateful to Frida and Richard for that, 2 people who had this business. But also when I left Essence, I put out, my resume to different places. I'd always wanted to work at Women's Wear Daily, and, I heard back from Women's Wear Daily, and I got an interview, and I needed a job by then, and, I got a job there as a fashion features editor, and I was there for 6 weeks because I got the syndicate, When they said
Okay.
yes, again, I said, "I quit. I'm gonna be a cartoonist."
Okay, so your dream had been fashion work daily at some point, and this is also still a good background. This is a good resume that you have from the retail, I forgot the name, Elon. That's still very impressive. So no surprise that they would hire you.
Yeah, I was
You think
I
about.
yeah, but I did come with the goods, I did have some goods, and, very shallow of me, but I just wanted to be able to say that I worked there. I didn't mind quitting, it's like, that was a daily,
Mhm.
grind, and
They
that's
like you. Mhm.
yeah, so I was like, "See the newsroom, got it. Gotta go now," so then I had the syndicate, so
Okay, and no regrets.
no regrets, not
Okay.
one. Yeah.
Okay. And the syndication one, so so when you started out, um, where I'm
Where
coming
I'm
from,
coming from.
we
Yep.
we started out with the Elan, but then that's the same one that you kept going when it got to Detroit, when it got to Universal Press as
Same
well.
ideas, yeah.
Okay.
So what happened with, once the syndicate, they're like, "You can't just have different women every time. That's too many people. Nobody's gonna catch on. It's not that's like and plus you're not a daily. That's not gonna work." And I was like, I wanted to make sure it was clear. What my point was that black people, black women in particular, because that's who I was talking through, are not a monolith. We gotta we have different kinds of and we can still all be friends. I was looking at my girlfriends, we don't agree on everything, but we still get along and this one gets on your nerves, that one doesn't. That's kind of what I wanted to show with them. So I whittled down the 7 million characters that I wanted to use down to 9 and I kept using them and um until that changed.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about some of the scenes, what you would have the women saying and what issues that they faced.
Yeah. I it would be whatever was occurring to me at the time. I'd talk about relationships. So the women would talk about their relationships with men. Um, and there was one character who was gay, but mostly I would talk about male female relationships, especially in the very beginning. And so sometimes I kind of think I was lucky that I wasn't. Not really. I'm not lucky. I wish had been. But in the Northeast, didn't I didn't have any papers there. I think the furthest north I got was Philadelphia. news, but I was in the Baltimore Sun, I was in the Washington Times, I was in, you know, Atlanta, um, but I didn't have Boston, I didn't have New York, and, so there I was living in New York, and, people didn't know, I could tell people I was a cartoonist, but they didn't know that I was a cartoonist, and, you know, a lot of times the reaction would be, "Oh, you draw for kids." I was like, no, it's really more adult," it's like adult conversations, and, oh, and I'd say, "Oh, and they're all women?" "Oh, you're dogging men." I was like, "Oh my, no, I'm not. No, I'm
Yeah.
not. I'm just holding up a mirror. This is
Mhm.
what we live in," so it was my opportunity. So I would say I did that, but I also talked about, um, politics and, topical, situations. I talk about racism. I talk about, being on your job and trouble you have there. Anything that I was talking about with my friends, I would include, and I'm a really good eavesdropper. So I could be at a at a restaurant or something, and I hear somebody saying something, I was like, "Oh, that's hilarious."
Yeah.
I would just use it.
Mhm.
And I think, I was just gonna say that I think that what, um, the beauty of that to me was that, these women ended up having these authentic voices, it's like you could read it and know that, "Oh, yeah, that's I could hear somebody saying that," I can understand that I can that makes sense, that conversation.
Yeah. Let's think about how just groundbreaking this was, right? So, the first Black woman syndicated, in
The
such
main
large mainstream publications, but then you just added in there one of your characters was gay, and this is the late '80s, early
This is,
'90s?
I was the '90s was
And
when I
not
got the most
which
play.
is still how amazing
Yeah.
that was for that time.
Yeah, she wasn't an ongoing character. She came in a couple of times, but yeah, she was. And she was one of the character's cousins, and just having the everybody talk about, "Oh, she's gay." That kind
Yeah.
of because it was that time. It was that time where people weren't that free to talk about things like that. And and I do wanna be real clear about I keep saying mainstream, but just and I say that because it was the white press. So, um, I know that they say Barbara was the first Black woman to be a cartoonist in newspapers, and I'm like, "Not." It's the first Black woman cartoonist was Jackie Orms, and she did her cartoons for the Black press, so in the '30s, I mean, 60 years before me. I don't know if I did the math right, but, way before me, and she was groundbreaking. That was never seen, and, here, the only way you would see Black characters in newspapers, mainstream newspapers, white newspapers, we were mammies, we were Jezebels, and we were, pickaninnies, we were coons.
Or we had the one character in Charles Schultz's Peanuts,
Oh,
who was a
Franklin came around the same time, that's same time the trio of that I was talking about earlier, that's when Franklin was introduced in 1968. So, that was like you were saying, the to your point, that's when they were saying, "Okay, we need to have Black people." There's all this stuff is all this turmoil is going on, all this
Mm,
racial turmoil. We need to do it. And he, to his credit, stood up and included one. I mean,
yeah,
he was a character that was just colored in, but still, but when you have black hands drawing Black characters for the white press, that's a whole nother thing, that's
exactly.
a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and Jackie Orms, I just wanted to mention is that, she showed a Black woman who was a reporter. She was very fashionable, there's not we had not seen ourselves that way in those years. She had romance in her life, she was just this fully evolved, and that's just Torchy Brown. She did several comic strips. Um, so I say all that to say that I was not the first, although I was the first in this white press. So that's 1989, believe it or not, that I became the first in the white press. And so I like to say that I am like more like Jackie Robinson of cartoonists, you know? So I, you know,
Mhm.
went over the color line and, crossed the color line and became, published there.
Yeah. What were some of the challenges as being the first Black woman in the mainstream press as a cartoonist? What did you see, even though a lot of your work you were doing out of your home in Brooklyn and sending things in, but if you're going to industry functions or people are asking you, what do you do? And you're telling them what you do,
Yeah.
what type of reaction did you get in
Uh,
that regard? Were there any challenges? Were there contract negotiation challenges compared to what you may have seen elsewhere?
uh, that's an interesting question because, I feel like I was very fortunate. I did reach out to find a syndicate, but it was somebody who said, "Can you do this?" So I came up with this idea. So I feel like the challenges were the rejections that I got, and I call it a challenge, but, I also felt like it made me feel more empowered. I was like, because the reasons were you can't have a comic strip with just women. You certainly can't have a comic strip with just Black women. You have to include environments. You have to put bodies. You can't just have floating heads. All the things that they said I can't do. And I was like, but that's the way I see it. That's the way I wanna do it. So that was a challenge until I got one that said yes, and one that was gonna stand by me because Universal Press was, Lee Salem was the editorial director, and he was my champion, you know? He's passed away, unfortunately, but, I still bring up his name because he was such a champion of my work, and he let me do what I wanted to do. He tried to convince me to he's like, "You can make more money if you did a daily. You can make more money," those kinds of ways,
Okay.
but, like I said, in my Brooklyn neighborhood, and parties and stuff like that, if it came out that I was a cartoonist, like I said, it was kinda like, "Oh, she draws for children," you know,
Right.
or because I was a very
So
creative
they, well,
area.
you weren't in the paper. So you weren't in the papers there, so they get to see
They
your
didn't
work.
know. Yeah,
So
yeah,
it
they didn't see
wasn't
my work.
quite the same kind of celebrity status that you could have been
No,
in
no,
another
it
city.
wasn't. Yeah, yeah, so I'm like, "Alright, that's okay." And then when I would go to, like, so there's a National Cartoonist Society that I belonged to back then, and I would go to their functions, and it would just be a sea of white men, you know,
Mhm.
hardly any women cartoonists, certainly no other Black woman cartoonists. They were like, so there's Ray Billingsley, who does Curtis. There's Jerry Craft, who's now blown up with his, graphic novels, but he did a comic strip called Mama's Boys. Rob Armstrong, um, Jumpstart, and Steve Bentley does Herb and Jamal. And so we would, like, take a picture together if we saw each other at something, like,
Yeah.
"Oh, here we are, the Blacks," you know? So it was and everybody always knew who I was because I was the only Black woman. They're like, "Oh,
Right.
you must be Barbara." I'm like, "Yeah, that's me." But, so I didn't I didn't think it was a challenge. It was interesting for
Yeah.
sure, but, it didn't, um it didn't make me feel bad or anything. I like it. It is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll have to add a personal story. I wrote for my high school newspaper, and I started a comic strip there with another friend.
Oh,
For the life of me, I cannot remember the name of it. I know I have probably a copy of it somewhere in a box in storage, so I'm gonna have to find it. But, I did more of the writing for it, and she was the illustrator, but there were some some of them that I illustrated as well with different characters, and
I love it.
I cannot remember it at all whatsoever. So, at least 1 full year, we might have done it for 2 years
Yeah.
as well, so now I'm gonna have to try to go back.
Please do. I'd love to
Yeah,
know about
yeah,
that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and Henrietta Garcia was my partner,
I love it.
so you're talking about a Black teen girl and a Latina teen at our predominantly white Catholic high school, and
Yeah. Good
we
for you
started a
2.
yeah.
Yeah. For you too. That's great.
But yeah, I did not I was definitely very into art. I took, art every year in high school. I took art every year in college. It was not my major, but it was a way for me to relax. I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna take one class that's gonna be an easy A
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Figured you're
and,
yeah.
and be a way to relax and still get credit for it." But beyond that high school experience, it never dawned on me to try to do a comic strip or to go more into my art. It was just always a way to relax, so
Yeah.
it was more about the written
Yes.
journalism for me
Yes.
at
Yeah.
that time, so
You know what? I'm very fortunate that I grew up with a cartoonist. I mean, I saw it done. It was very accepted. It was, he was like a star, in the neighborhood, of course. And because he was in the newspaper, he was on TV and, you know, so I saw how it could be done. So I had a role model right there in front of my eyes. And even though it didn't dawn on me all that time, it's like, "Cartoonist, I'm not gonna do that." I was like, "Oh." When I was asked, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I can do that."
right. Not everybody wants to necessarily go into the same profession as their parents, and then some
Absolutely.
some who
Sure.
do.
Yeah.
So, tell me about, maybe an experience that you had of someone who maybe approached you, whether it was by letter or email or in person, of, "I became who I am because I saw your comic strip." Now, maybe they didn't become a cartoonist, but maybe, again, because you're talking about what was, professional women in a sense, right? In terms of we were writing about how it may have inspired them in some way because that was the purpose of these newspapers, right? Wanting it in there. There were no
Yeah.
faces like ours on their pages in that sort of way. And we know we still hear it today where we all have examples of the first time I saw a black face doing X, Y, or Z, and I realized
That's
I
not
can
gonna happen.
also be a judge, or I can also be a doctor, or I can also. So yeah, is there a story you have like that?
It's I have met some young cartoonists. Well, everybody's young to me because younger than me. Um, but Jennifer Crute, great cartoonist and writer, and she's a great writer, and she's a great, fine artist, all of that. And, when I first met her, she was like, "Oh, it's you." I was like, "What?" She's like, "I'm a fangirl." It's like, "What?" It just that makes me feel very good, and every time I meet, Bianca Nunez, she's got a cartoon strip, she's one of the writers and illustrators for, Six Chicks, which is so she's syndicated, and, Steens is another one who I've met and who told me that mm, they knew of my work, and I don't know if I made them help them to do it, but they were, like, excited to meet me and to know who did this work, and, it makes me feel really good.
Mhm.
And even now, I've had, talks, like, when the book first came out, I had a talk at a bookstore and, just telling my story, and a woman came up after me, she wasn't black, a woman came up after and she was like, "You know what? You made me feel like I can do this." She's like, "I'd been feeling like I can't do this, but you're talking about how you would reject it and all that, and you persevered. You stuck you did your strip the way you wanted to do it, even though you were told that's not the way to do it." So I hope I still can inspire people to stick with them with what they feel is true to them.
Yeah. And so, yeah, tell us a little bit more about the book itself. So again, where I'm coming from,
Yep.
so it has,
Years.
your I'm saying illustrations, but the cartoons, the comic strips in them, but it's a little bit
More.
more than that. So yeah, explain.
Yeah, so, here it is just before the pandemic, and, I hadn't done the comic strip, I hadn't been syndicated since, 2005, so this is, you know, 2020 maybe or 2021, I get a call from Drawn and Quarterly, those folks, who made that book, and they're this really special publishing house, and I, in my ignorance, didn't know anything about them. And I was like, you're a little skeptical. You're like, "You wanna do what?" It's like, "You wanna make a book of my what?" And, she's like, "Can I send you some of our books?" And she did, and they were incredible books, and, um, I was like, "You can make a nice book of my stuff?" She's like, "Indeed." And as they kept asking me for more things to add to the book. I was like, "What are you doing?" So as it turns out, it's 14 years of selected strips from the 14 years that I was syndicated, but it's also, um, essays, and there's an essay that I wrote about being a cartoonist from when I first started out, and then on the back end, there's an essay of how I felt after the syndication was over and how I got back into it. But there's also an essay, written by, Sharon Pendana, who did a profile on me, and she talks in depth about my life and all that. And then there's, Rebecca Wanzo, who's a professor at not sure where, but um, she's a comic scholar, and she wrote an essay that kinda puts my work in, historical context.
Mhm.
And I there's a little added thing of, they stuck in a page of doodles of mine, and they stuck in and several pages on that profile each character so who's who and what they're about. So it is, and it's hardcover, and it's kinda nice looking, I think, it's like they did it, Marty Claus, who I was talking about at first, who, was the one who reached out to my dad and got me. She was the managing editor at, Detroit Free Press, so it's like my journey, it's kind of the origin story of me and my work, and my press kit, all kinds of stuff is in there. It's kinda cool.
Right, yeah, and I'll add Rebecca Wanzo
Yes,
is professor in the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at WashU in St.
yes.
Louis.
Yes, yes, thank you, thank you. I'm gonna see
And
her next week.
oh, you are? Okay, what's the occasion?
There's, a zine expo in Gainesville, Florida, at the University of in connection with the University of Florida, and, she's gonna be there, and, Caitlin McKirk, who's part of the Billy Ireland Cartoon Museum and Library and Museum, who, are really great champions of my work and my dad's work, um, and they're gonna be there. It's a one-day deal, and they're gonna be on a panel, and then I'm gonna do a presentation. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Now, I'm curious too, so one, being able to do this book also shows that you own the copyright to your work, because
Mhm.
so often we hear stories of people, right, who the publication or the whatever the other outlet was owned the work and they couldn't do anything, and I kinda compare that to today. I know there's a lot of publications just in terms of how freelance journalism has changed from the writer owned their work to now the media outlets saying they own the work in perpetuity. So amazing that you
Yeah, I didn't mention that, I have there were 3 of us. I was the youngest, my sister, my brother went into, education like my mother. My mother was, early childhood education, my brother went to education, and, I kind of followed in my dad's footsteps, obviously cartooning. My sister, our sister was a lawyer, so, she kinda helped, me navigate all of that early on. So, I had my copyright even when I started with,
okay,
the syndicate. Yeah.
fantastic, fantastic, yeah, to be able to see this. So yeah, so where I'm coming from, I know I got my copy on Amazon,
Hey!
and so hopefully other people who are looking for a copy can find it wherever books are sold.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, anything else you wanna add?
Um, let's see. Only other thing I would add is that, I did a with, the help of, my friend who's Tara Nakashima Donahue, who is kinda curating my comeback. She's just a very good friend, and she's a curator, and, together we've put together, a exhibit called Still: Racism in America, um, a retrospective in cartoons. So we have a collection of my work, my dad's work, and we don't say anything there's nothing next to each piece other than the year,
Mhm,
and, it is pretty profound when you see that what my dad was talking about in 1966 is something I was talking about in 1996 or
mhm,
even 2026.
mhm.
So it first showed in a gallery. Her parents owned a gallery in Manhattan. It first showed there, and then it went to the Billy Ireland, um, Museum, Oha the Ohio State University, and then it went to UC Davis, and now it's been donated to the Billy Ireland, and now we're working on bringing it to different locations. So
Okay.
if anybody sees Still somewhere, go see it. It's really good.
Well, I am based in Minneapolis. I think ground zero for many things in the last 5, 6 years.
That's right.
So it sounds like it would be a great place for it to come on exhibit.
Yes.
So hopefully, there is a location here that would pick it up and would love to bring it here.
Yeah.
So hopefully
That would be great. That would be great. I'm
okay.
gonna keep on you about that.
Okay, okay. Yeah, we got, there's a few different places in my mind that I can think of, but I have no connections in that world, but
Yeah. Yeah.
hopefully someone can.
Yeah. Just mentioning them, I can get them to do the legwork. Yeah. Yeah.
Great, great. Well, I appreciate your time.
I
Thank you
appreciate
so
you
much for joining me on This Conversation Matters. So
really
yeah, so
happy to
thank
do that. I'm
you.
really very pleased to that you included me. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks for listening today. I'm Sheree Curry, and this has been This Conversation Matters on Power 104.7, supporting the mission of the Minnesota chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists. Follow us on Instagram at NABJMN and me at Sheree Curry Media. And be sure to subscribe wherever you find your podcasts. Let's keep the conversation going.
Hi, I'm McCall, and every week we take you beyond the story. An NABJ Minnesota program brought to you by All About the Culture and Power 104.7 FM. Beyond the Story introduces you to business owners, community leaders, and media professionals. Join us Tuesday evening for Beyond the Story. Today, we're speaking with Samantha Honglong, journalist at Sahan Journal. She speaks on the future of journalism. So, Samantha, should future journalists be scared or hopeful for the future?
Well, I think it's a mix of both. Like, I think, for example, in my role, right, like I'm a journalist and I'm working in journalism, but it took, when I was a student, I was always questioning, like, is this the right path for me? Because of all the attacks on the press, all of the pressures that come with being a journalist. But I think it's also very hopeful because, like, during this time that we've like this very crazy time that we've been facing in Minnesota, I think it feels like you're helpless, but then like you go to work and you're doing work that matters, and it's shaping the narrative, it's impacting people, it's able to inform people of resources and dangers in their community, and I think that's a very powerful thing. And journalism is a very powerful thing, and so to have a role in that is very hopeful, and being able to play a part of protecting freedom of speech and protecting those who are vulnerable through your storytelling is a very valuable and worthwhile thing.
I'm McCall, and this has been Beyond the Story, where the story continues.